Welcome, everybody, to our class series again on harmful emotions. I say harmful, I think, because those, emotions, not necessarily all of them are harmful, but those emotions that particularly that can cause us harm in the sense that it contracts, makes us smaller, lets us enjoy life less than we should if we were able to overcome them, and they end up controlling our lives. And so we're talking about a number of those different ones. And last week we spoke about anger. And today, this morning, this evening, I'd like to address another one, big one that I think all of us can relate to, and that's fear, or perhaps its friend, worry. Those two, fear and worry. Let's maybe speak a little bit about them, and maybe come up with some ideas. One, understanding it, and two, maybe that will help us to be able to address them and overcome them if we suffer from those. I'll begin by invoking the presence of our gurus, the masters, to join us. Divine Mother, Heavenly Father, beloved friend God, great masters of self-realization, and beloved Guru Paramhansa Yogananda, join our meeting this evening with thy presence, and may we feel ourselves guided by that presence. Help us to be strong, courageous, and have the ability to face all obstacles in life without fear, with courage, and in the knowledge that you are always with us. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Anyway, good to have you back again. And I think, as I mentioned, I wanted to address this topic about fear and worry, in a sense, because they end up, as I said, why something like that might be considered negative is because we know that sometimes these things, they come into our lives and they begin to control us, and they begin to guide, they're unpleasant in and of themselves. But of course, then the decisions that we make in the thrall of those emotions, fear, worry, these sorts of things, they can lead us into perhaps making bad decisions, things that aren't really for our overall welfare. And really, they can be pervasive in the sense that they're thieves. They steal the joy from our lives. And that's not how we should be living our life. But of course, we know that fear is a natural thing. You might say, natural in the sense that I suspect it's biologically, physiologically ingrained within us. There might be a tiger around the corner. And so there's something perhaps there's a logical reason why this world is not always a friendly place. And in primitive times, you can have a lot of things that can happen to us. So it's a natural reaction. It's good to know, and I think all of us teach if we have an appliance, or I know when years ago I used to have a wood stove for heat for the wintertime, and of course, my daughter at that time, when she was little, I'd say, you got to watch out for that wood stove. You don't put your hand, or on any hot surface, you don't put your hand there, you're going to get burned. And so, in a sense, you could say a person could get to the point in life where they fear because something's, I could fear that hot stove, but it wasn't that. It was just being cautioned. But yet, it could be, if you take it to extreme, of course, we know that leads into fear. Maybe there is a wild animal out there that's, that we need to be afraid of, or certainly maybe not afraid of, but we need to be on the lookout for. But everything in life, in modern life too, if we find that people have fear of losing one's job, terrorism, becoming, here we've come out of COVID, getting disease, fear for one's life. Well, how about, or even fear for other people, our children's safety, fear of technology, what it's doing to the environment, all sorts of these things. And once those seeds get planted, even a little bit, sometimes they begin to grow. And it's often you see in people, and maybe in ourselves as well, we see that these little fears can begin to grow, and they become magnified, and sometimes totally out of proportion to, they say fear of people, fear of an airplane crash. They say it's more likely you're likely to die driving to the airport than you are to die from the crash of that airplane somewhere. But yet you know, we know that people have automobile accidents all the time, but they don't make the news as much as when an airplane crashes. And so we see that on the news. And so we begin to have somewhat of a disproportionate view of life. And we begin to then, what happens is that we start thinking about those things, we start to worry. Those things that seemingly might be, now I'm not saying an airplane crash is trivial, but there are things in life that can be somewhat trivial, but if you magnify it, you can start worrying about it. So I think you look back in your life and there's lots of things. I remember when I was a kid, or many little children are, they're worried about getting lost or crossing the road. Or I remember we had a bully in our neighborhood, and that bully, I was worried about him for a couple of years, when I was about 10 years old, there was the bully down the street. So it seems now when I look back, I thought, well, why was I so worried about that? But then as you get older, I remember being a teenager. Actually, it's not just being a teenager. I think we're still worried a little bit. Nobody wants to look foolish. But of course, you magnify these things when you become very self-conscious when you're a teenager. I didn't want to look foolish. I didn't want to get bad marks, of course, and your parents are mad at you. And I had, I was afraid of all sorts of social things at that age. But then you grow up, you become an adult, you have family, all of the, old age, money worries. It just goes on and on and on. And so you might ask the question, well, everybody knows what fear is like because it's so pervasive. Isn't it true? Everybody's been fearful at one time. And I remember having this conversation with Swami Kriyananda. It was in a small satsang, and somebody asked him the question. He says, Swami, I'm fearful of XYZ. I'm not sure, I can't remember the specifics. How does one overcome fear? He says, this is really bothering me. I'm really fearful about it. And Swami started to answer, then he paused for a moment. And he says, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time answering your question because I have to be truthful. I've never emotionally felt fear. So I'm having to think about what it is. Intellectually, I know what it is, but emotionally, I've never felt it. And I thought, well, that's remarkable. And it stuck with me, that statement, that because he just wasn't afraid of anything. And I saw that actually in his life. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't cautious when caution was needed. He didn't take appropriate action. He didn't block it out. But yet he didn't feel that emotional reaction. And the question comes up, of course, to me, well, why? And how can I be like that? Because it's not that we want to overcome fear and we're indifferent to things. So we don't have, the positive side of what fear, being one is fear. We fear something because we know there's danger there. So it has a positive role in its own way, positive, to play in our lives. So we don't want to lose that. But that emotional reaction, which causes us to contract, it steals our joy of life. And we begin to worry, because then when we worry, we become preoccupied with something and we begin to obsess about it. And it really does take away our happiness and joy. And it puts us in a bit of a prison, because we find ourselves, and when I was 10 years old, that bully, I found myself ordering my life so I wouldn't run across him. And after a couple of years, I got to be a little older. I said, wait a minute, I confronted that. I said, I'm not going to live like this. But at a certain point, you don't know enough, perhaps, and you're fearful of that. And so, really the question when we're speaking about fear or worry is, what do we do about it? Because it's really not enough to say, oh, somebody says, it's all in your head. Well, that's the problem. It is in my head. that doesn't make it go away just to know that, or to give a philosophical discourse about, well, it's you're attached, which is true. The basis of fear is attachment. I'm attached to the way things are. I'm attached to this body. I'm attached to my feelings of likes and dislikes, all of these things, and I don't want to lose them. I don't want something threatening them. I'm attached to my children. I don't want something harmful to happen to them. So yes, we are attached, but it's not enough to tell me that, because it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And so we have to kind of look for some solution of what really helps. But it's good to know that they do have their place. It's nature's way of telling us that there is possibly a threat, or so we have to be cautious about something like the hot stove. And it's probably good to worry that maybe I'm going to run out of petrol on my way to work in the morning. I better go fill it up. If we learn from it, it cautions us. So in a sense, sometimes a little fear can motivate us even. I remember when years ago, I knew an elderly gentleman. I was very young, and so elderly maybe meant he was 50, but he was, in his younger days, he had been a performer and a singer, a performer, an actor, those sorts of things. And I asked him, I says, do you ever get nervous? Because I was, petrified, to perform or to go on stage and do something like that. It was really, when you're young, you don't want to do that sort of thing. And I was always nervous. And so he said, yes, just a little, just enough to get my adrenaline going, to get me sharp. And he says, I find if I'm not a little bit apprehensive, I don't rise up my own energy to meet it. So, and I thought, oh, that's good. A little bit of a wake-up call, you might say, is good, because if it wakes you up and makes you, awake and ready to do whatever it is you're going to do. But if you have like a smoke alarm in your house, if that smoke alarm, it's good. It warns you if you have a fire at night. But if that thing's going off at the slightest, which sometimes happens, a little bit slightest of you overcook something in the frying pan, and it's going off all the time, your life is living in a time of stress. And so if we think about what might we do about it and look toward the solution, it's good. I think there's different types of ways to approach when we're fearful. And one solution that many people come up with is, you might say, the fearlessness approach and the preparation approach. You might take this attitude, I'm so strong, I'm invincible. In order to get that way, in order to get fearless, I have a solution for everything. Every problem, I've thought about it. I have an answer for every trouble. I'm protecting, in other words, I protect myself. Nothing can go wrong. I've got to make enough money I don't have to worry about that. I go to the gym and I work out so that I eat healthy foods. I'm going to build a fort. In other words, I'm going to build a fortress around myself in this worldly environment. And I'm going to answer all of those possible threats, and anything that new comes on the horizon, I respond to it. I'm super vigilant. And there's, I think, a little bit of that in all of us to some degree. But I think ultimately we realize, yes, we do need to do some of that. And it's, we want to be healthy. We want to take care of it. But there's always, you get rid of, like Swami's song, you get rid of troubles. You get rid of one, and then you have to face its friend, and again and again and again. And so in other words, you make yourselves, you put up enough walls and fortresses and solutions, which to some degrees, like I say, is common sense, but that alone is not going to solve the problem. And I was thinking of the Mahabharata and the Battle of Kurukshetra there. There's all the Kauravas, and right at the beginning, Duryodhana says to all the warriors, he says, at all costs, everybody we must protect Bhishma, because Bhishma is the leader of the army. And of course, Bhishma is, as Lahiri Mahashaya wrote, and Master passed on that knowledge, that Bhishma represents the ego. In other words, the ego is being threatened. And essentially, this is what fear is about. Fear is basically attachment, and it's the ego dealing with the various infinite number of threats in the world, in the ego, the soul attached to the body, and of course, not just the body, but an ego attached to the emotions, ego attached to that self-identity, that personality, and anything that threatens that, we have to protect it. And that, you could say, to the degree that we live in this world of duality, we are inevitably going to be under threat. And so consequently, and we do live in this world of duality. So yes, we feel that threat, and we have to do a commonsensical amount of things to that. But more and more and more and more is not going to be the solution to that. And you realize protecting ego, eventually you just can't do it anymore, and you end up giving it up. And so then the other way to go about that, you could say, is I just can't do this anymore. And I'm not going to just protect everything. And you could say the other one is, this is another way to approach this, is, well, I really have nothing to lose, so I'm not afraid of anything. And of course, you take it to the other extreme of that. There's nothing to protect. And of course, this is perfected, of course, this is the yogic way to approach it. There's nothing to protect. There is no ego there. And of course, it's a spirit. There's a spiritual expression of that, which is what we're all trying to do, there is no threat to me in life because I don't have that. I'm not holding on to anything. Now that's the positive approach, which I think all of us practice. I think most of us are practitioners of yoga, and we think because everything is ours, and there is no threat to myself. But of course, it can also be approached in a negative way. Well, you become careless. You don't care. You're reckless. You take unnecessary risks. You don't do the proper thing. And of course, to protect the body, that we have a duty in this. Long as we're in this world, we have to live successfully and appropriately to the situation. So you can take that, if I have nothing to lose, I'm going to become reckless. And you find people that are like that. They're not fearful, but they don't take proper care. And sometimes, of course, teenagers are like that. I think there's a certain phase sometimes we go through that we just become reckless about, and we didn't think. Your parents say, what were you thinking? And, well, the teenager, he wasn't thinking, and he was reckless. But the positive side of it, of course, is that we want to get to that point where there's nothing to protect. Who am I to protect what? And so Swami used to say, every night before you go to bed, and you meditate in the evening, in that time, he says, mentally build a fire and cast all of those attachments. What if this happens? Because this is what fear leads us to, and worry. It's that consciousness of what if? What if that happened? What if I got sick? What if my child got lost? Or what if this, what if that? And we become consumed by it. And he said, at nighttime, just throw them into the fire. And, you might say, build a mental fire, throw all the habits, the attachments, free yourself from all those things until you feel that sense of freedom. He says, be like that neighbor of Paramhansa Yogananda's in the desert, who just had a very little simple house, and he's just like a little hermit out there in the desert, singing all the time. And his master would say to people, says, look at that man. He is like the king of his castle. He has nothing, but he's happy all the time. And, or approach the world like Master in Rockefeller Center when in New York City, beautiful building. He went to tour the building, and he went in and he said, this is mine. And it's like, and so he enjoyed it as if it was his. And then when he walked out of the building, he gave it back. He wasn't attached, but he enjoyed the world while he was there at the center. And so we're here the same way. It's not ours. And if we consciously practice it, life, this is you could say, this is the practice of contentment. It's a feeling in the heart, imagining all those strings of attachment, we slowly cast them aside. But I think the third way I'd like to suggest is, and to approach it, is to develop, the antidote of fear. Because we're fearful of a lot of different things. And the antidote of fear is to develop that quality of courage, approaching the life. And courage comes from confidence. You have a certain confidence in life. And you approach, how would you normally develop confidence in any skill? Take a little bit and you practice, and okay, now I'm confident I can do that. And you take something larger, and I'm confident I can do that, until you build your confidence up. And experience and practice builds confidence. And you find that along with the attitude of, if I don't succeed, don't say you failed, you just haven't succeeded yet. And you allow yourself to fail in what you're doing in small things, until you say, okay, I know what failure feels. Now I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it again. And you just keep, and you build confidence, and you gain, and you learn to deal with failure in a positive way, that it's just a stepping stone to getting better and better at something. And in that, you begin to build confidence, and to the point where you're not afraid of losing. You're not afraid of falling. And you come to know that you can do this, and you can approach whatever those fears are. But really, confidence is, those you might say, outside things. But confidence, you could say, is there's a deeper level of confidence, of knowing that there is nothing to fear, there's nothing to lose. I've told this story before, when David and Goliath, that story of the young man David with his slingshot conquering this big giant warrior, Goliath, who had all the warrior and all the qualities. And he went out there, volunteered to fight one-on-one with Goliath, and representing that army, and David would represent the Israelites. And they went to battle, and it seemed like, was David afraid? And David was absolutely not afraid. He was confident, because he knew that with that slingshot, he wasn't even going to get close to grappling with Goliath, because in those days, if you could hit any object with that slingshot, because a shepherd would use that to keep the wolves and the wild animals away from his sheep. And he went and he used a slingshot, and he hit Goliath with the first stone, put him right down. And he said there was nothing to be afraid of. He knew he was going to win. And I think that's how, if we realize when we face life that there's nothing to lose and I am going to win. And when we speak about this in the spiritual context, is what I'm aiming at here, is when we know that God is with us, the devotee knows that they're secure in their spiritual resting in God, that nothing can touch me. And this is, I think, why Swami never knew fear, really. He never knew emotionally, because he was never afraid. Because Master was always with him, on his side. And whatever obstacle situation came up, he was going to be able to conquer it. And there was nothing to lose, in the sense, because if you don't have something to lose, and so you lose a fortune, he could make a new fortune. So you can lose your life. Well, you get a new life. So you lose this or you lose that. It's not who you are. In other words, he had no ego there to lose, or ego attachment. He had ego, yes, but in a positive sense, but he had no negative aspect to it. And so there was nothing there to lose. And so, but I think from a practical point of view, if we look at fear, that's what we strive for, but we're not there yet. So what can we do? I think the first thing is don't allow fear and worry to paralyze you or panic you. And one of the best ways to address that, I found, and I think just general common consensus, is the necessity to, in any situation, no matter what the fearful situation is, to take some sort of positive action, conscious positive action. And it doesn't really matter what that is, but because one of the first things you might say that, or one of the first ways that fear gets to us is it paralyzes our will. And we begin to, immediately we're on the defensive. And I think we want to be on the offense, conscious positive action to anything, to something. Because you do one thing and then that leads you to doing the next thing and the next thing and next thing. And you begin to develop a positive flow toward a solution to whatever it is that is causing the fearful situation. And it may be, I'm going to look for a tree to climb when the bear comes, assuming the bear can't climb the tree, but, or whatever the animal that's, the wolf maybe, that's a better one. So you look for solutions. What can I do? Okay, a storm is coming. What can I do? A hurricane or whatever it is. That alone unlocks the paralysis, you might say. I can deal with this. I can do something. Yes, you may be worried a little bit about the result, but do something appropriate to the situation. And notice I say appropriate, not something foolhardily. And this corresponds to what Swami Kriyananda says, look fear in the face and it ceases to bother you. And even if it's the monster under the bed. I know when I was, I don't know, I must have been 8 or 9 years old. I had saw some very scary movie. And I went home and I was sure that, there was some monster was going to break in. And so I to my bedroom where my room was. And so I blockaded the door, and I thought, well, I'll blockade. And then I had a bow and arrow and I got my bow and arrow out. Remember, I was 7 or 8 years old. I don't know. So, and I had my bow and arrow by my bed and I said, if that monster comes in, I'm ready, And I went to sleep with that thought in my mind. But it was, I took action, and maybe as a 7 or 8 year old, but we do it a little bit more maturely now. But the idea here is engage in physical activity of some sort and mental too. And the fear, it doesn't overwhelm you. And I think this is, and let's say you're afraid of public speaking, they say is a universal, not nearly universal. Most people don't, when they take it up, don't enjoy that. But, well, do something about it. You prepare your talk. You do deep breathing. You exercise. You get your you just don't allow yourself to become paralyzed. And you do something, and you're starting with the physical, which is, we can all do that. And you pay attention to it, do it very consciously. And by doing that, what's happening is whenever you're fearful of something and the worry comes, what are you doing? You're concentrating on yourself. Threat, you're under threat. So you become self-absorbed. And so the antidote for becoming self-absorbed is to take the focus away from yourself towards something outside of yourself, the problem itself, a solution to that problem perhaps, or just physically doing something. And you find that in itself will help begin to moderate, help to moderate it and at least give you solutions. And then positive action to learn skills to address. If it's something, that you can actually do something and learn about, well, then do that. And, and you'll find that in the doing, you begin to magnetize yourself and begin to draw allies, mental, emotional allies to yourself, because fear really does, it puts a hole in our aura and it makes us susceptible to negative influences. And so it's not positive in that way. So we want to do, what can I do to strengthen my aura? That I remember when I was a teenager at that time. I wanted to develop confidence and courage, so I took up martial arts. Because that made me feel more confident. And then I was very, I was socially fearful. And so I remember, going to social occasions, I thought, oh my God. So I took a dance class. I remember it sounds ridiculous now, but it made me comfortable in a little bit more comfortable in social situations. I remember I went to a speaking club, to a public speaking, and you practice giving 2-minute speeches, in a social situation. That was helpful. And they had lots of good techniques about what to do. And I think really, as I began to think about fear, as you grow up, you begin starting with fear on physical things, the very elemental. But as you get to be an adult, I think one of the pervasive fears as an adult is fear of failure. In other words, you begin to, what if it doesn't work? And the embarrassment of failing, the consequences of anything. You fail in business, you fail in trying something new, and what is really being threatened there is you might say it's a more adult fear that people have, is the ego becomes threatened. And I remember, again, going back, I was a little boy, about 7 or I don't know, 6, 7, 8, I don't know. And all the kids in my neighborhood had bicycles and were riding around on bicycles, and I didn't have a bicycle. And I remember I wanted to ride a bicycle. But I would, say, why don't you get a bike? But I didn't know how to ride a bicycle. But I was so afraid of, and so I'd say, oh, I don't want to ride a bicycle. I don't want a bicycle. You guys ride the bicycle. And haven't you done things like that as you get older? You're not very good at it. You can't do it. So, oh, I don't want to do that. You're afraid of making a fool of yourself and showing that you're not as good as somebody else. And that sort of fear blocks the very thing that you were trying to achieve. I wanted to learn how to ride a bicycle, but I was afraid of revealing my inability to my little friends. Well, fortunately I got over that, but somebody helped me. It was my brother actually came to my rescue and says, hey, you got to learn how to ride that bike. And he taught me. And then I felt that fear went away, but it was a good lesson. Sometimes we fall into that in more adult ways as we get older. And I think the Swami, when he would speak about fear of failure, he says, don't focus on the possibility of failure. He says, really, put your attention on what does it take to become successful. And then accept the fact that to become successful at anything, you're going to fall down. Like me on my bicycle, sometimes you're going to fall, but that's part of it until you learn to be able to be a success. So he says, better focus on the attributes in your life that will make you a success rather than those things, the consequences of failing. And until we can succeed, we're going to, in a sense, if we're looking at all of the things in life that are possibly going to harm us and worry about them, we're never going to get to the point of confidence, because through experience of learning to deal with those things until we can become successful and confident in ourselves. So I think a lot of it is, and others, we have to use common sense. You don't scale a cliff without some experience, to build up to it. So you'll be using common sense and taking it step by step. We keep learning and keep going, except the inevitability of sometimes going through the learning process. And confidence is built, and your courage is built when ultimately, when we're talking about climbing the mountain of spirituality, of finding true freedom, we realize that it takes many steps, and that ultimately God is helping us, wants us to succeed. And I think this is the devotee's approach, that God is waiting for us to take the steps to be able then to get on the bicycle, to be willing to get on the bicycle and pedal. And like my brother in those days, he held on, and God is going to be there to hold on and to get us to be able to ride. But we have to have the willingness to get on the bike to start with and to face whatever it is. So that's an element of having the courage, but you have to start with small things, and you start with small things, and you move up and you move up and you move up. And as I've grown older, I don't think there are too many physical things that I'm afraid of anymore. I mean, obviously I'm not foolhardily, but it's, those little social threats to my ego. And I think as you get older, I don't want to look like an idiot, so I still want, and I don't want to, but even those, as you get older, you realize, well, the body is taking its natural course of aging. And I think as you get older, you just say all of that silliness of youth and worrying about status and worrying about what people think, it's also ridiculous to some degree, and you just let it go. And you can do that. Some people never can, I think, because they don't have an inner life. And all of that comes when you realize it's the inner life that begins to, if I can be successful there inwardly, that happiness is not conditioned by things outside of myself. And you begin to come to that as you get older on the spiritual path, and you begin to relax, and you could say there's nothing outside of myself that I need to be fearful of losing, because it doesn't matter. And you find little by little that you begin to gain that inner confidence. And, there's nothing to lose in life, because you really inwardly, you have what you need. And if things are taken away outside, well, I'll just keep trying, and the next thing that'll come, and I'll just keep going. And God is with me at all times. And he says, I had a quote here that I'm going to read that Swami made of something I found was interesting. He said, "The consciousness of change is allied to the fear of death," because ultimately that's, you might say, the big challenge. The last big challenge we face is that transition of going beyond this body. And it's behind much of our, physical fears. What if I die? What if I lose everything? And, that we have to, and I think this is why he wrote that essay, which I would recommend all of us read. It's called The Final Test. It's all of us need to be able to prepare, you might say, the final exam for that, ultimately what we're all of us are going to face. And so in the meantime, affirm success. Don't be afraid of failure. And then you'll find that you can walk through life confidently. Nothing will be able to touch you. You're not going to be afraid of anything if you have God with you. So there's many practical things, and I'd love to have you share if you have some on the chat box here. But I'm going to go over to the chat box and see. He says, what about fear of the unknown? What may happen, or if we have a tendency to thinking of all the wrong things that may come to us or others? how to deal with that. Well, there's two ways to look. One is to be fearful of the unknown, and one of is to be curious of the unknown. What's going to happen next? And the question would be, of course, why would the unknown be fear-inducing? And because we lack the peace of mind, the confidence that it may be threatening to us. But if there's nothing to be threatened, then of course there's no fear. And so it is something I think. I think it just naturally comes that when you're less attached to being disturbed. People, in one level, I think everybody would like some things to change, but when it really comes down to it, most people don't want change. Change is frightening, because what if, and so I think that question embodies this the question is what if, and well, maybe there's a gold coin under the rock, but of course, maybe there's a scorpion under the rock. So it could go either way. And I think we have to approach life with a certain amount of commonsensical caution when conditions warrant it. But when they don't warrant it, I don't think we have to be able to put a little bit of this everyday fears on the shelf, because otherwise we're just in the what if mode in a negative way all the time. So I think, how do we get to that middle point? That's the question of life in general. Is courage the lack of fear, or going forward despite the fear? Obviously, I think the answer probably is going forward, even if it may seems to be somewhat fear-inducing, and that's one type. That is courage. That is courage, even if it's fearful, because it's the right thing to do and you're going to do it. And you've prepared, but you haven't the total confidence yet that God is with you. So there is no fear needed in the first place. Now, but to be able to face your fears is always recommended, and to gain that, but to face them not recklessly. You see, face them positively, because you've assessed the situation, you've prepared for it. And it's difficult, but you're going to do it only because it's the right thing to do. You're doing it not heedlessly, but you're doing it for the right purposes. And how about little fears that may come if, like, you meet dangerous people, or when you are outdoors about wild animals coming? Obviously, you have to take, what is appropriate. That's the thing. It's interesting. Like, I think it goes back to, how do we judge the validity of some cautionary action? How cautious should we? I mean, I somewhat joke about this. Is some parents are so worried about their kids falling down and scuffing their knee that they won't let the poor kid go out and play. And because it's an unreasonable amount, because the kid needs to fall down and scuff their knee. But of course, you don't want them getting run over by a car either. So but there's a balance between those. How do you come to that balance? Experience, a willingness to experiment. And we have at Ananda Village here, where I'm staying right now at the moment, there's a tree in the front yard of there's a market there, and in the front yard, there's a very old, little, not very big apple tree. And it doesn't look very nice, but I have great sentimental value for that tree, because I think every kid that has grown up in this community has climbed in that tree. And of course, to them, it probably looks like it's way up there, but really it's about head high. When they get up to the first branch where they have to get up there, they're going to be about maybe almost 2 meters up in the air. And I've watched people, and the parents will, oh, no, don't get in that tree, you're going to fall. But how a tree like that, for a little kid, they can't resist it. They got to go up there. And sure enough, some of them fall and they start crying. And but it's like a rite of passage, I think, for every kid to get up in that tree. And not all of them fall, but many of them eventually do sooner or later. And I think we have to have those trees in our life. There are trees in our life like that, that we have to, they're there, and part of us wants to climb that tree. And so learn to climb the tree and be willing to fall, I think, is probably more healthy for that little kid, but within reason. That's the question. And what's reasonable to one is not always reasonable to another. And what if I resist learning how to ride bicycles because I know inwardly I might become arrogant about being a great rider? Wow, now fear of my inner arrogance. No, that's it. Well, then, you could see the problem with that. You're not going to do anything. It's really, to be self-aware of your arrogance is to, really you have to deal with it. If you don't do anything in life because you're afraid you might become arrogant, that is a fear. You could see where that's going to lead you into a ditch because you'll do nothing. And you have to overcome the obstacle of arrogance, which, I think all of us, we don't want to become proud of our achievements, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't strive. We strive, but, success, you could say, I'm afraid of success. Some people would say, I don't want to try because I might become successful. And he says, I don't want to be happy because I might become happy and enjoy it too much. In other words, you can see there's something a little bit perverse there. And so that's the challenge. We have to, it's not so much riding the bicycle, it's learning to deal with the ego that may get out of control is what's happened. You don't want your ego to get out of control. And so this is a lifelong lesson I think all of us face and I think Swami was, interestingly, Swami Kriyananda had an approach of that. He said that is, in one form, it's a very good question, because in one form or another, people think that controlling the ego by suppressing it is going to make you more spiritual. And it doesn't. He says, as the Gita says, what avails suppression? You can't suppress act. You have to act in life. Non-action is not the solution. You can't, you're going to have to breathe whether you're not control or not. You have every act. You have to act. And the question is, the question of not riding the bicycle, is that what the Gita is addressing? The Gita is addressing that very directly. Non-action is not a solution. And it just delays the situation. And so that would not be and so Swami said, suppressing the ego is not how you're going to overcome the ego. You have to use the ego in a positive way and then slowly learn the lessons of egotism until finally you can overcome that ego and you can put it aside. But to not express your ego by, to suppress it won't succeed. You won't get there that way. And so you have to suffer the negative results of egotism in order to understand that that's not what I want. I want to do something better. So that's the same thing. I think this is why it takes spiritual courage to be on the spiritual path, to face the demons that we have and to do battle with those inner demons, the inward demons, not to back away from them, but to engage them, but in a positive way and with courage. And then those are the things that are behind our fears. The outer fears are just physical manifestation of a lot of these things that are inside of us. And so do it in a positive way, little by little, appropriately, and learn the lessons of life. So thank you all for joining me this morning. And I'll hope to see you next week.